rare convergence of meteorological forces has plunged the coastal city of Edgewater into crisis. Over the past 48 hours, the town has endured relentless rainfall, unusually high tides, and a stalled weather system that together triggered widespread flooding, infrastructure strain, and emergency rescues. As of Friday evening, local officials confirmed that floodwaters had entered at least 30 homes, with several neighborhoods rendered impassable and emergency crews stretched to their limits. The flooding in Edgewater was not the result of a single storm, but rather a compound weather event, a dangerous cocktail of seasonal king tides, a full moon, and a low-pressure system stalled offshore. This rare alignment amplified tidal surges and overwhelmed the city's stormwater infrastructure. Edgewater received between 6 to 8 inches of rain within 24 hours, with some areas approaching 12 inches. The full moon triggered a seasonal king tide, raising sea levels and pushing saltwater into canals, rivers, and storm drains. Saturated ground and blocked drainage systems led to rapid surface flooding, especially in low-lying areas like Florida Shores and Canal Road. Meteorologist Robert Haley from the National Weather Service in Melbourne noted, "This was a perfect storm of timing and geography. The king tide reduced drainage capacity just as the heaviest rains arrived. It's a textbook example of compound flooding." Edgewater's emergency services were inundated with calls as floodwaters rose swiftly. Police issued warnings to avoid flooded roads, particularly in Florida Shores, where vehicles were stranded and water entered homes and businesses. Water rescues were reported near New Smyrna Beach and Edgewater, with several residents trapped in vehicles or homes. Voluntary evacuations were encouraged in flood-prone zones, though many residents chose to shelter in place. Preliminary estimates suggest dozens of homes suffered water intrusion, with damage to flooring, electrical systems, and personal belongings. City Manager John Dunbar stated, "We've never seen flooding this fast. Our teams worked around the clock to deploy pumps, barricades, and emergency shelters, but the water kept coming." Edgewater's stormwater system, designed for moderate rainfall, buckled under the dual assault of freshwater and tidal surges. The city's aging drainage infrastructure, already strained by previous flood events, proved inadequate. High tides backed up storm drains, causing water to pool in streets and yards. Key arteries like Canal Road, Cheetah Drive, and parts of US Route 1 were closed due to standing water and debris.
Like, seriously.
Several neighborhoods experienced temporary outages as water reached electrical boxes and transformers. Public Works Director Maria Lopez emphasized the need for long-term upgrades. "We need to rethink our drainage strategy. Climate patterns are changing, and our infrastructure must evolve." Edgewater is no stranger to flooding. Located in southeast Volusia County, the city has faced repeated flood events in recent years, often triggered by tropical storms or seasonal tides. But this event marks a turning point. Flooding has become a regular occurrence in Edgewater, Port Orange, and New Smyrna Beach, prompting calls for regional resilience planning. Rising sea levels and more frequent extreme weather events are increasing the likelihood of compound floods. Critics argue that local zoning and development policies have failed to account for changing flood maps and stormwater dynamics. Environmental planner Dr. Lila Grant warns, Edgewater is a microcosm of coastal America's vulnerability. Without proactive adaptation, elevated roads, permeable surfaces, and tidal gates, we'll see more events like this. For residents, the flood was more than a meteorological anomaly. It was a personal upheaval. Tom and Linda Reyes, retirees living near Cheetah Drive, described waking up to ankle-deep water in their living room. "We've lived here 20 years. This is the worst it's ever been." Jasmine Carter, a single mother in Florida shores, lost her car to floodwaters. I couldn't get to work. My kids were scared. We need help, not just sandbags. Pastor Michael Green, whose church served as a temporary shelter, said, "We opened our doors to anyone in need. This is what community looks like in crisis." Meanwhile, South Carolina's coastline has been battered by a rare and destructive convergence of natural forces this week, as seasonal king tides, a full moon, and persistent onshore winds triggered widespread coastal flooding from Charleston Harbor to Folly Beach. Streets turned into rivers, businesses shuttered, and emergency crews scrambled to respond as water levels surged to some of the highest seen this year. The flooding began Friday afternoon, October 10th, when high tide peaked at Charleston Harbor, pushing seawater into downtown streets and low-lying neighborhoods. The National Weather Service warned that dangerous rip currents and waves up to 6 feet were possible along Colleton and Charleston counties throughout the weekend. A naturally occurring high tide caused by the moon's closest approach to Earth, amplified by the full moon. Persistent easterly winds pushed seawater inland, exacerbating tidal surges. A strengthening offshore system added gusty winds and rain, further elevating flood risks. Meteorologist Andrew Wolfeck of South Carolina Public Radio explained, "This week's king tide was already expected to be one of the highest of the year, but when you add strong winds and a full moon, the result is major coastal flooding." Charleston's historic downtown saw water creeping into Market Street and East Bay Street, with footage showing cars navigating submerged intersections. Folly Beach, just south of Charleston, was similarly inundated, with waves crashing over dunes and flooding beachside roads. Several coastal roads were closed due to standing water and debris. Property damage. Businesses near the waterfront reported water intrusion and damage to outdoor structures. Public safety alerts. Officials urged residents to avoid flooded areas and heed rip current warnings. Charleston Mayor John Tecklenburg stated, "We're seeing the effects of sea level rise and more frequent tidal flooding. This isn't just a nuisance. It's a threat to our infrastructure and way of life." South Carolina's coastal infrastructure, much of it built decades ago, is increasingly vulnerable to tidal flooding. Drainage systems in Charleston and surrounding areas struggled to cope with the influx of saltwater, leading to backups and street-level flooding. Saltwater intrusion into storm drains reduced capacity and slowed runoff. Beaches and dunes suffered erosion from high surf and wave action. Navigation hazards. Low tides following the surge created challenges for boaters and commercial vessels. Experts warn that without significant investment in flood mitigation, such as elevated roads, tidal gates, and permeable surfaces, events like this will become more frequent and severe. The flooding in South Carolina is part of a broader pattern affecting the entire Atlantic seaboard. From Florida to New Jersey, coastal communities are experiencing similar compound flood events due to the same weather system. Coastal flood advisories were issued across Georgia, Florida, and the Carolinas. Rising sea levels and more intense weather systems are increasing the frequency of king tide flooding. Policy implications. Urban planners and state officials are reevaluating zoning laws and floodplain maps in response. Brandy Addison of USA Today Network noted, "Charleston is expected to see significant impacts, with potential for major flooding midweek. This is a warning for the entire East Coast."